Hi, this is a beginner's guide to CSS selectors for test automation. I've created a really simple web page here with several different types of HTML elements that you will come into contact with while doing test automation. Over the left we can see the HTML behind the scenes, and at the top here I've got a single CSS rule that will set the red border and background to the element that we have selected. And so what we're going to do is we're going to change this element to match each of the different elements in the HTML and to go over the different CSS rules that we're going to use. So starting off, this is the simplest type of CSS rule. This is a tag selector. Now in our case, we only have one element, which is a H1, and so only one element is being highlighted. This is fine. But if we change this to H2, now we have multiple elements being selected. And typically in test automation, if you're asserting or interacting with something, what you really want to be doing is providing a single element that should be interacted with. And to do that, we need to select that one element from the DOM. And this is the DOM, the document object model. So we need to improve this. If I look at the HTML, you can see that we've got ID of hero. And if we want to select this one, we can use the ID of hero, and then this one we can use the ID of about. So there's two ways we can use IDs, but this is the simplest way. We can say hash and then we can say hero and it will select it. If I change that to about, it will select it. And so this is the built-in ID selector into CSS. Now, if you have an ID, you should probably use it over anything else other than a test ID. And different tools will support test IDs differently. DoesQA has a big long list of test IDs that we support, so you can use test ID selectors really quickly. I will show you attribute selectors, and I have an example of a test ID selector that we'll do manually at the bottom. So that's how I can select either one of these H2s. But what if I want to select the first paragraph that comes after it? Well, this is where we can start chaining selectors and using some of the special properties built into CSS selectors. So if I use the plus, this denotes that I'm interested in getting a sibling. And then this is the tag type of the sibling that I want to get. So you can see I'm now selecting the first paragraph because this is the direct sibling, that's what the plus sign means, to the about. If I change this to a tilde, it selects all siblings. But again, we want to select a specific one. So I'm interested in using the plus sign. If I wanted to select the paragraph, the second paragraph, we could actually chain this, but ideally we would avoid it. If we move on to classes now, you can see in the HTML we have this container and it's a div with a class of container. So if I change this over in the CSS window to dot class, so the same as what we had for the ID, IDs use a hash, with classes we use a full stop. So dot container is now selecting the whole container. And if we wanted to select the paragraphs inside that, we can do that. Or if we wanted to select just the paragraph 4, the one that is nested inside, then we could actually say, okay, now a tag selector inside of that, and then we can say paragraph. Now we've only got the paragraph 4 selected. If we only wanted to select the paragraphs at the top level, so 1, 2, and 3 inside container, then we can put in a greater than symbol and then say P. What we can then do is we can then say first child, and that will select the first child. Now, if we're doing first child and we didn't have that that greater than symbol, then it would select paragraph 4 again because it is the first child of its div. So we want to say we want direct descendant, that's what that means, and then we want paragraph, and we're only interested in the first child, and that's how we select that one. If we wanted the next one, we can change from first to nth child, and we can say nth child 2, and we can say 3, and of course we could have said 1 as well. If we wanted the last one, then you can do last of type. There we go. Last of type selects the paragraph 3. So if we move on, we've now got a form and we've got a sequence of different elements. So we've got label, we've got input, and then we've got span for a bit of validation. And so we're probably going to want to check the text on this. we're going to want to check the value, or set the value most likely, to the fields. And then we're going to also want to make sure that the validation appears for the correct element. So I'll show you how to do all of that now. So if we start off with the label, it has very little we can go on except this attribute of 4, and that matches up with an ID on the input. And so if we look at this one for the password, it has 4 of password, and then it matches the ID of password. So if we want to select this label, we can do that using the attribute selectors. And so what we can do is we set up square brackets, and then we put that in. So the attribute 4 matching the value equals. There are other things you can do. So you could say where the attribute value starts with email, with carrots, or using a $, we could actually say ends with. But in this case, and for simplicity, we'll just keep it to this. If I was to remove the value entirely and just do 4, then that's going to match all elements that have the attribute of 4. So this is really quite useful when you know the sort of power behind the scenes on attribute selectors. And if we go back to the container, we could actually do this with the class as well. So we could say class matching container. So it's just because we have shorthand versions that we use the full stop for classes and the hash for ID. So if I set this back to 4 and email, now we have the label being selected, and so we can check that this says email like we expect. Now what we can do is we could go to the email. We know how to do that, so we could do that in a couple of different ways. First off, we could say input, and now we're selecting the first input after the label with 4, and of course we could have put label on that as well, but this has an ID on it. It has an ID. So if we change this now, we can just go to email, and now we've got that, and we could say input email, and we can really stack them up. Hopefully this is starting to all make sense. But how do we select the class error, the span, with a class of error after it? So if I just do span, you'll see both of them are getting selected. If I do error, they're both selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the sibling again. We're going to do it based off of the input that we're interested in. So we're interested in email, and then we're going to say error. If we're creating a test for this, what I would do is I would set a bad value to email, and then I would check to see that email plus error actually is appeared. Like I'd wait for it to appear, or I'd check that it's appeared, I'd put a good value in, and then I'd make sure that that element no longer appears in the DOM. So that's what we can do for that. And of course we could then just duplicate our selector and change it to password, and we've now got the validation password. Please don't do just error. Okay, don't set a bad email address and then just check error has appeared, because as you see, you'd be matching any of them on the page. And finally, we're going to look at this data test ID down here. If you see data test IDs in your HTML, then I highly encourage you to use them. Someone went to the effort of putting them in specifically to make the test automation quicker, easier, and more reliable. And so wherever possible, you should use them. But if you're not using a tool that handles data test IDs automatically, then you might need to still create selectors for them. And so the way we do that is with the attribute selector. You can see it's being selected. If you are using a tool like DoesQA, then all we need is the value part, the login. And we can go and we can create a new element, and we can select test ID and login when we're creating our elements. And behind the scenes, what we'll do is we'll match it up with all of the different variants of test IDs that we have seen developers use across the web. That's it for this video. If you have any questions on CSS selectors or would like to see a part 2 of this, then please do let me know. Hopefully this has been helpful to you, and if I've missed your favorite type of CSS selector, then definitely let me know what that is. Thanks very much. Bye.